Right, I'm going to try and share my screen now. So I hope this works okay. Um, I hope people can see that and that they can hear me.
That's good.
Lovely. Well, I'd first of all like to say thanks to Michael, thanks to Alex for organizing, and thanks to everyone for coming. It's great to see some faces that are familiar from the MPhil. I know I haven't got to see many of you as often as we would have liked, but it's a joy to be able to share some of the work that I did in the course of my MPhil and that I am now in the course of pursuing further in a PhD in the Loyola Institute. So it's a pleasure for me to share my topic. To paraphrase Churchill, I didn't have the time to write a short heading for my research, so I came up with a long one instead. Towards the theology of wonder, and a lengthy subtitle, Christian Wonder and the Poetry of Patrick Kavanagh. I couldn't decide between two titles, so I came up with two. So without further ado, I'll get on to explaining myself and explaining this picture that I've chosen kind of as an accompanying image with my research. I might come back to that at the end if I have time, because it's one I like a lot. So what will I be speaking about? This is my ambitious program. I want to introduce wonder and the concept that wonder is in decline today. What do I mean by that? I'll try to explain. I'll explain the relationship of the current Pope, Pope Francis, with wonder. It's something he's written about and discussed in his work. Then I'll start to put poetic ideas of wonder that we encounter in Patrick Kavanagh and Seamus Heaney in conversation with the theological tradition. And that theological tradition consists mainly, in my research, of Augustine and Aquinas, who do both write on wonder. And then I'll try and sum up my conclusions so far in my research on wonder, which revolve around these two ideas of virtue and sacrament. I'll try to explain what virtue and sacrament have to do with a Christian wonder. And by the end of my 10 or 15 minutes, I hope that we'll be moving towards a theology of wonder and this question, why bother with such a thing in the first place? So not only will we have a better idea, hopefully, of what wonder is, why it's important, but also what a Christian wonder is and what Patrick Kavanagh has to do with that, if anything. So let's begin. In fact, I'll wait here till I introduce what I believe wonder is a two-part encounter. An initial encounter with something mysterious that you don't quite understand, and then a movement towards that mysterious component. So you encounter something you don't understand, that perplexes you, that interests you, that astonishes you, and then you move in some sort of way towards that mystery. You incline towards it because you find it attractive in some way. I propose that wonder is incredibly important for the religious believer and for, in fact, everyone in society, but that today it is in decline. Why is it in decline? For a number of reasons. Modern technology being foremost amongst them, and our increasingly secular society. There's a nice quote that kind of sums this up from Fran O'Rourke. Modernity has robbed mankind of its gods and leached the world of mystery. Our sense of wonder has largely evaporated. There is little that astonishes or startles us. The world has become all too familiar. We assume science has solved the great questions with little residue for reflection. It could be argued that the lack of a sense of transcendence today springs from the loss of wonder. So I think Fran O'Rourke does a good job there of connecting wonder with this idea of transcendence. And we start to get this sense of why wonder might be important for the religious believer. It's kind of a gateway, kind of an instinct towards the transcendent. So we kind of have this instinct that there's something more, something attractive, something mysterious that we incline towards, and wonder is what I would call that movement and that recognition. But today it is in decline. Pope Francis himself has made wonder and the decline thereof an important part of his papacy. We encounter it in Laudato Si. He says, today we need a bold cultural revolution against the spirit of globalized technology, where a constant flood of new products coexist with a tedious monotony. Let us refuse to resign ourselves to this and continue to wonder about the purpose and meaning of everything. Otherwise, we would simply legitimate the present situation and need new forms of escapism to help us endure the emptiness. So this emptiness of modern society that is leached of its sense of wonder, what Pope Francis and many other commentators worry about today. The poetic tradition, yes, the poetic tradition has always been in tune with a sense of wonder. Wonder is more or less the idiom of poetry in the Irish tradition, particularly with poets like Heaney and Kavanagh, I would say. The wonderful everyday would be how I would describe, or many people have described the poetry of Kavanagh and Heaney. And Heaney himself has a very poignant quote on this. He seemed to recognize that the decline of wonder was accompanied and has been accompanied by a decline in this sense of the transcendent. He said before his death, "The biggest shift in my lifetime has been the evaporation of the transcendent from all our discourse and our sense of human destiny." So one of the giants, Heaney, of the Irish poetic tradition, tuned in to the importance of wonder, but also to its decline and the decline of the transcendent in our society today. Kavanagh, I would say, was a titan of wonder. His poetry is a hothouse of wonder, and Kavanagh really taught Heaney many things about how he used wonder in his work. And Kavanagh really saw wonder as a route back towards a sense of the transcendent. And he has this quote that the poet is a theologian. So Kavanagh is less afraid, less reticent than Heaney. He's less God shy than Heaney. And in fact, wonder kind of emerges as a poetic and a spiritual vocation for Kavanagh, I would say. I think the genius of Kavanagh is that lightness of touch with which he intuits wonder as a essentially religious attitude. He doesn't do it insistently. He doesn't do it in a heavy-handed way. For him, wonder is simply a gateway to his God. And he does that so brilliantly in his poetry. So that's why I've landed on Kavanagh in my research so far. There's a famous quote, probably his most famous quote on wonder. You might be familiar with it from the poem Advent. "Through a chink too wide, there comes in no wonder." The previous line is, in fact, "We have tasted and tested too much, lover. Through a chink too wide, there comes in no wonder." So Kavanagh was aware, even in his day, that society was inclined to taste and test too much. He realized, as Pope Francis does today, how easily wonder can be trivialized, commodified, misguided, stunted, banalized. It can be flat packed and mass produced, as IKEA so wonderfully tell us here in their well-known catchphrase. So Kavanagh worried, I'll just go back for a moment. Kavanagh worried that wonder was being trivialized, and he realized that not all wonder was in fact good wonder. And this kind of is a springboard into the theological tradition. This idea that not all wonder is good wonder. There can be such a thing as bad wonder, and the goal of Christian wonder is to direct our wonder towards the good. And by the good, I suppose, we mean God. So the Christian tradition in Augustine and Aquinas focuses on bad wonder, what they would call curiositas in the Latin. So much of the Christian theological tradition of wonder is preoccupied with the avoidance of this bad wonder, this misguided wonder. Virtuous wonder is what the Christian tradition aims at. This virtuous wonder in which our fears, our desires, and our hopes find a studious balance before God. This became the ideal for Christians, to avoid curiositas. Curiositas, an example that Augustine gives, is the bloodlust of one of his friends, Alypius, in Book 6 of the Confessions. He says his friend became overwhelmed with curiositas when he went and watched a gladiatorial combat, and the blood and the violence and the crowd. And there was this wonder at this in his friend, but a bad wonder, a curiositas. And this is what we should avoid as Christians. Okay, so that's, I said at the beginning of my talk that wonder had brought me into the realm of virtue and of sacrament. So the avoidance of curiosity brings us towards that sense of virtue. We want virtuous wonder. Sacrament is the next thing I want to speak about before I draw things to a conclusion. And it really begins with that word mystery. So what I would say is at stake in a theology of wonder is the inherent sense of mystery at the heart of the Christian faith. And I suppose we get from the Latin sacramentum is where we get that word mystery. So wonder is a sacramental state of mind, how I would put it. It's attuned to the mystery of God's presence in our lives and the transcendent surfeit of meaning in the world around us. It's a lovely phrase Jack Maritain had, the more than is of the material world. So this sense that there is more than meets the eye in the world around us. A sunset, a beautiful sunset, is more than a collection of light particles. You know, for a Christian believer, they would be able to see the sacrament of God's presence in that sunset or in the world around us. So having that sense of wonder as a Christian alerts us to the mystery of God's presence all around us, what we would call that sacramental presence with a small s, a mysterious presence. But of course, that sense of the mystery of God's presence, that sacramental presence with a small s, becomes important later for God's sacramental presence with a big S in the sacraments of our faith. And I'll come to that in a moment. There's a line here I want to use to finish up my reflections on Kavanagh. He has a beautiful line in his poem, The Self-Slaved. And I think it captures what wonder is for Kavanagh. To wonder well is to be capable of receiving with grace the grace of living. To be capable of receiving with grace the grace of living. So it's a receptivity to the gift of life, the grace of living. I'll move on to that. So finally, why bother with the theology of wonder at all? I said earlier that wonder attunes us to the sacrament of God's presence in the world, the sacramental presence of God in the bits and pieces of every day, as Kavanagh would say. But of course, to appreciate the mystery of God's presence in the formal sacraments, with the capital S, we need to attune our sense of mystery. We need to have a functioning, virtuous sense of wonder to appreciate that there is something more going on in the world around us and also in the sacraments by which we communicate and understand our faith. And there's a beautiful quote from David Jones that I think captures this, this element, as I say here, of no wonder, no sacrament. No sacrament with a small s, no sacraments with a big S. And he says, human beings, through no fault of their own, are being alienated from the mere notion of sacrament with a small s. Were this alienation to become complete, the sacraments of the church with a capital S would lose meaning for people. They would have to be taken on authority or dismissed as an outdated conception of man's nature. So I think you get a sense there of what is at stake when we talk of a Christian wonder. It's not just something nice that we think of when we read a bit of Heaney or a bit of Kavanagh. It's really at the heart of our Christian faith. It is the disposition with which we approach God in the bits and pieces of every day and also in the formal sacraments. So I think that's probably a good point at which to draw my few words to a close. And I would just like to say that this little picture here for me captures what Pope Francis said on the 5th anniversary of Laudato Si. He said, my work and Christian wonder in general is so important because it alerts us to the signature of God in the world around us. I suppose this picture captures for me the fingerprint of God in the world around us. That's how I like to think of it. And I like to think of wonder as a way of alerting us to that fingerprint or that signature of God in our lives. So I think at that point, I will stop speaking. I forgot to set a timer, so I have no idea how long I've gone on for there, but I hope I didn't go on for too long. So I'll stop sharing.